Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Perspective. We'll be talking about pursuant to the verdict in the Practice and Procedures Act, all of that, the consequences of the Practice and Procedures Act, which are being talked about as far as the former Prime Minister Nawaz Shareef Saab is concerned. We'll be talking about the possible ramifications of this judgment. Of course, we've seen the former Prime Minister Shareef Saab also categorically say Azam Nazir Tarid and other PMLN PMLN members categorically say that this has no bearing on the former Prime Minister Nawaz Shareef Saab's overall participation in the elections, in the electoral process. We'll be talking about this. A little later on, we'll also be talking about Palestine and Israel, the war at this time, the brutalities that we are looking at, the situation on ground, and what can we expect. The de-escalation that was being talked about doesn't seem like a possibility at this time. Is it even a distant one, considering the kind of brutality we are looking at as far as Israel now is concerned? All of that today on Perspective. I have with me Saif Jamshed Baryar, who's a political analyst. Thank you for being with us today. Hafiz Ahsaan Ahmad, khokhar, who's Advocate Supreme Court. Thank you for joining us today. A little later on, we'll also have other guests. Saif, so we saw the verdict that came as far as the Practice and Procedures Act is concerned. To a lot of people, it seems to not have been much of a surprise, but its political consequences. I'll go to Hafiz Saab, of course, as far as the legality of it is concerned. We've had political statements from the PMLN members, of course, Shareef Saab also. How do you look at the political consequences of this decision at this time?
Thank you, Mahrukh, for having me here. It's a pleasure to always be on the program. Well, the political consequences, as far as I see, are very much boastful about the particular political uncertainty that has already been catalyzed. Now, the supporters of PMLN definitely were looking forward to 21st of October, apparently, and they were looking forward to a very warm welcome for their leader, who has been long been in this self-imposed exile. Now, the fact of the matter is that it further puts the voter of PMLN in uncertainty, number one. And number second, the part that is even more important, that's the wider political scenario at the moment. Because the wider political scenario at the moment, it does require the elections to be happening in February. So if, for example, there is a particular legal repercussion and this indirectly is further appealed on to the Supreme Court by PMLN, it might cause a political electoral uncertainty amongst the average voter. So I genuinely believe that at this point of time, I think what happened in the Supreme Court recently, it is a momentarily a setback for PMLN. And in these moments, I think PMLN's top leadership itself is confused at the moment as to how to be going about this verdict, because there has been a long-standing history of PMLN of its contention with the courts of law, and particularly the highest court of law that stands for the supremacy of the law, Supreme Court I'm talking about. So now they have to actually decide that whether this verdict should be having a political narrative or it should be having a legal narrative. And I think the top leadership, the top tier that is still being awaited, the top tier sitting in London right now, when it comes back, definitely Nawaz Shareef Saab being the supreme leader of PMLN, they have to actually decide that whether the discourse of action of PMLN in the next 3-4 months will be a legal discourse, it will be a political discourse, or it will be a combination of a legal and a political discourse.
I think that's interesting when you say that whether it will be a legal discourse or a combination of legal and political discourse. I want to go into that, Hafiz Saab. As far as the case itself is concerned, as far as the decision itself is concerned, it's a split decision, which seems to have not been a surprise. But overall, does it not, the decision itself, do you think it also indicates perhaps a divide in the Supreme Court, even now?
Thank you so much for inviting me here. There is no doubt on it that there has been a strong perception about our Supreme Court of Pakistan. There has been a division, but to the extent of the division is the judgment is a healthy sign. But then you are sitting, the 7 judges, 17 judges, they are over there, and everyone has a different, the constitutional background and his observation. So it is a good sign for any Supreme Court of the world. But in Pakistan, for the last 2-3 years, we have been seeing starts from especially the tenure of the Chief Justice Saqib Nisar and then onwards, there has been a division among the judges of the Supreme Court, and which has been reflected while we have seen for the last 1 year in having a constitution of benches. And there has been much criticism over the Chief Justice, former Chief Justice of Pakistan, about the composition of benches and about the fixation of cases. So that shows a clear division among the judges of the Supreme Court of Pakistan. But when we talk about this particular case, that credit goes to the current Chief Justice of Pakistan, because he has been seeing this process for the last 3, 4, 5 years, being on the senior most position in the Supreme Court of Pakistan, and he was neglected in all important constitutional and legal matters by 2-3 Chief Justices, former of the Supreme Court of Pakistan. So he has realized the ground reality, the inside working of the Supreme Court of Pakistan. This is one aspect. The second aspect is that if we divide the history of 184.3 in Pakistan, we can divide into 3 eras. One is from 73 to 93. It is a silent area. Only one judgment was taken place under Article 184.3, and that was specifically for the enforcement of the public interest and fundamental rights. Then the second tenure starts from the Darshan's Masih case. That was the first landmark judgment about the Supreme Court of Pakistan for the protection of the fundamental rights on the Brickton sites, bonded labor. And that tenure starts from 93 to 2007 and 2008. And then we have a very, very active Supreme Court in terms of Article 184.3 of the Constitution, and then it carries on. That starts from the tenure of the Chief Justice, former Justice Iftikhar Muhammad Chaudhry, and then it went on the climax in the tenure of Justice Saqib Nisar, and then there has been legal repercussions of these tenures for the former 2 Chief Justices. One
but
was
Hafiz, have we seen the kind of division we are looking at now before?
No, yes. If you have been a division in your institution, it takes time. But the healthy sign is that the first step the Chief Justice has taken, he hold a full court meeting, and they decided to hear this case in a full court. Initially, that should have been decided by the Supreme Court itself, because there has been a demand from the bar associations, from the justice sector, the political parties.
You're saying the full court should have been perhaps made constituted earlier.
Should have been held much earlier, and I'm talking about from the 2014-15. That was the right time for the Supreme Court of Pakistan to address and rectify these issues. But as a Chief Justice, no one take the steps, and that is the result of that. Now this is the ground reality. Now the present judges of the Supreme Court of Pakistan who supported the Practice and Procedure Act, they have seen and they have realized the sentiments of the people, and they have realized the sentiment of the bar associations, and they have realized the sentiment of the ground reality. The ground reality is that the discretion of the Chief Justice of Pakistan should not be unbridled. It should be regulated, and if the Parliament makes the law under Article 195(1) of the Constitution, because I as a student of law think that there is no bar to the Parliament to make the law under Article 191 of the Constitution, because the argument has been built on the ground that since 1973 to 2023, the Parliament has not made any legislation under Article 191 of the Constitution. So that makes a question that it would be an intrusion into the independence of judiciary, and the violation of separation of powers, which should have not been. That there was no intrusion and there was no such violation of the separation of power in the parliamentary form of government.
Let me come back to you. We also have with us Usama Ghumman, who is also a lawyer, a legal expert. Usama, we've been talking about the Practice and Procedures Act, and of course, now that the judgment is here, the decision is here. Another issue is also its retrospective effect. As far as I understand, the court has now said that this will not have a retrospective effect, and that also is split by 7-8. Am I correct?
I think 7-8, yes, that's correct.
So the effect of this and the question of, of course, we've seen the PMLN take a stand on this. and their opinion, which is backed by lawyers like Azam Nazir Tarid and a host of other lawyers also, about whether an ordinary law can take precedence over, a constitutional amendment or a something that's in the constitution. Correct me that if I'm wrong. How do you look at the future of this as it pertains to the former Prime Minister Mian Nawaz Sharif Saab?
Mahrukh, I think there are two questions here. One is normative question about what is the right function of courts, and the other is more narrow technical legal question. So I'll first come to the narrow legal technical question, and which is, as the law stands today, the Supreme Court of Pakistan has held, and it by a judgment by Justice Umar Ata Bandial Saab, that any disqualification under Article 63 vis-a-vis Sadiq and Amin disqualification, that disqualification is for life. And Mian Nawaz Sharif Sahab and Jahangir Tareen, they have other politicians, they have been disqualified under this very same provision of Sadiq and Amin. So what the Supreme Court has done is interpreted the Constitution. And it is an accepted legal position that an ordinary law cannot trump the constitutional interpretation of the Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court had interpreted ordinary law, then the Parliament perhaps can legislate competently. But in this scenario, the Supreme Court has interpreted constitutional provision. And the Parliament, the only way for the Parliament to do undo a constitutional interpretation is by amending the Constitution itself. So as law stands today, my humble reading is that it affects Mian Nawaz Sharif Saab, it affects Jahangir Tareen and so many other politicians. Having said that, I and on a broader jurisprudential and also what is the proper role of courts, I think this is a judicial overreach, and this is continuation of the same trend that Hafiz Saab just pointed out, especially starting from Iftikhar Chaudhry, and it reached its peak during the period of Justice Saqib Nisar Saab. When the courts, instead of doing their own work, they were utilized as an instrument to demolish, credit our politicians, to interfere in the parliamentary, democratic, organic process. The instruments of law, and especially this interpretation concerning Sadiq and Amin, was used to disqualify perhaps at that time the most popular politician in land, and that too on Panama proceedings, and everyone saw. But having said that, since the Supreme Court has held that there is no retrospective right of appeal, and we don't know the reasons, but we can only speculate.
Right? Does it show, in your opinion? Let me come back to you on this. I'm going to, I think, go to Hafiz Saab and then go to Saif. Hafiz Saab, the fact that there is, it's 5-6. Is it 5-6 or 7-8?
7-8.
Sorry.
It's 7-8.
It's 7-8 on the issue of retrospective, effect of this law. What does it indicate? Is it on the one hand, of course, it's normal to have that kind of a split in any decision, and it's a full court judgment. But how do you look at it legally? It means that
to me, I have. Today I have also written a letter, the article on the subject beginning of new era in the Supreme Court of Pakistan after the judgment of the Practice and Procedure Act. If we talk about specifically the pertinent to the Section 5 about the retrospectivity, there was no retrospectivity as we have claimed, and we are submitting over here with special reference to Jahangir Tareen and Mian Nawaz Sharif's case, because the retrospectivity was to the extent when there was a case, it was decided under Article 184(3) of the Constitution, and you had not either you have not filed a review against the judgment, or your review is pending before the Supreme Court of Pakistan under Article 188 of the Constitution. And if the case was decided and you have availed the remedy under Article 188 of the Constitution, so that means it is a past and closed transaction. Okay. So in particular two cases, these two cases were decided under Article 184(3) of the Constitution. They filed the review before the Supreme Court of Pakistan. The review was dismissed by the Supreme Court of Pakistan. So the matter was closed, that is the past and closed. So in that particular situation, we are just making the argument that the Section 5 would apply to all proceedings which was initially decided under Article 184(3) of the Constitution. It is irrelevant, because the constitutionally and legally, when you avail the remedy against a particular decision, then the matter is closed. So now there is a trend in the Supreme Court of Pakistan, because we've been over there. That
but how do you do, okay,
yeah.
legally, let's put legality aside,
Yeah.
and I'll take Saif on this
Yeah.
also. There is, by and large consensus on the fact that the Panama judgment was
Yeah.
wrong.
Yeah.
And that again, like Usama also said, the most popular politician at that time was wronged. In the kind of situation that is, how do you right this wrong then?
No, there are two things. One thing is that the Parliament has the power to nullify the judgment of the Supreme Court of Pakistan by 2/3 majority. They can do it. First. The second was that the Supreme Court of Pakistan, in some other case, made certain observation and undo the earlier observation made in that particular case in another case. And the third is, there is a petition is also pending by the Supreme Court Bar Association that 62(1)(f) permanent disqualification, because there was no, the prescribed period in 62 article of the Constitution. There is a 5 years period prescribed in Article 63 of the Constitution. So the Supreme Court in 2018 judgment hold, in particularly 2017, with reference to, as far as the court declaration is in field, the person who is involved or who is convicted, he stands for that until the declaration was unturned by the court of law. Right. So in that particular situation, this is a permanent disqualification. Now there is certain observation by the Supreme Court, even by the former Chief Justice of Pakistan, that it is a harsh, you can't disqualify permanently a politician or a political leader in Pakistan.
But let me come back to you. And I want to say, overall, as far as this, like I said, how do you right this wrong then? I mean, of course, you have the legal purview under which the legal ambit has to be taken into account. But of course, that is one of the considerations at this time, should be a consideration.
There are so many judgments which earlier had been decided otherwise by the Supreme Court of Pakistan. Why we are specific for this purpose? Now there is two options. One option is,
let me take,
you can go with it.
Mahrukh, I would like to second you on that, because I think there has been a long-standing political history in the country where we've actually suffered because of precedents, and we've actually suffered because of the long-standing effects of those precedents, and after maybe a decade or two we realized that we had gone wrong. So no matter what the current decision of the court is, but still I do believe that the PML and Supremo has an indirect right to appeal as well, and there's also another route.
And if there are other people also,
Yeah,
I mean, if you look at Jahangir Khan Tareen as one
absolutely.
of them.
And I think if, frankly speaking, we start saying it loud that political leaders can be permanently barred from the political process like this, it would ultimately lead to more political marginalization. What the need of the time is to maybe, for once, also try to see some political repercussions of legal decisions as well.
Okay.
Because when the Panama verdict was announced, many commentators in politics and many commentators in law, they did believe that the future of this verdict would be bleak, it would be dull and it would be gloomy. And today we are seeing the effects of it. Because currently, maybe if not an indirect appeal, there's another route as well. Maybe Mia Saab can also file an application before the relevant returning officer. And this is also one of the routes for him to be contesting the elections ahead, because previously.
But then if there's an objection from the other side, it would invariably land in High Court.
It would invariably land in the High Court, and ultimately some resolution would have to be resolved, because we want a political consensus right now. And I firmly believe that without a political consensus, these things ultimately go nowhere, because there is a political party who are waiting for their political leader to arrive back, give them a direction. And ultimately, if they land directionless, knowing on the day that he cannot maybe contest the elections, it's not political optimism. it's ultra political pessimism, and that's the last thing that we can afford right now. So what I'm trying to take the debate is, where I'm trying to take the debate is to a different direction, a direction of maybe deciding that whether we want political discourse out of this decision right now, or we want simply a legal battle or a legal discourse. Because if there has to be a legal battle, then ultimately, hypothetically, let's assume that somehow Mia Saab can contest the elections. And hypothetically, let's assume that PMLN comes to power. Ultimately, they would be making an amendment in the parliament as well. And I think that would still ultimately do what has already happened in the past. It would make the political spectrums clash with the legal spectrums. And history would repeat itself once again. So what I'm trying to point out to is that maybe law should objectively be based on retrospect as well.
In this case?
Yeah, in this case.
Usama, I hope you've been following. I think that Saif here makes a very interesting point. As a lawyer, how do you look at this? In this case, perhaps the only way to undo what is, what the wrong is for the law to have retrospective effect. Although, Hafiz Saab here is saying that there are other routes also, and of course there's a pending legislation at this time in the Supreme Court.
Mahrukh, I think I agree with what Safullah is saying. In this extent that I said that we don't know what are the reasons why did the Supreme Court reject. We can only speculate, and I think the speculation would not be very far off the mark of the Supreme Court's reason. The reason appears to be that it would open floodgate. It would be not in public interest. There have been those transactions, and if we allow retrospective, it would be much more harmful than beneficial. So strictly speaking, Mahrukh, this is not a legal argument. This is more sort of a utilitarian argument. And if we look at the jurisprudence of the last 15 years, then we will have to assess that what is more harmful, or let's say what is more beneficial, either to close the past door and not correct the jurisprudence that has been developed, and that jurisprudence is not only confined to Nawaz Shareef or Jamshed or this jurisprudence has had profound impacts on our society, on our country. So the Supreme Court in last 15 years has taken tremendous leaps in terms of jurisprudence that have nothing to do with law, and I think the right question is to assess whether the Supreme Court is the proper forum to assess this, that okay, we don't want retrospective appeal because it will be not in public interest, or public interest is served by the fact that this jurisprudence that has gone off the charts, this needs to be revisited in selective cases. And I think it's not Supreme role, and this is legislature's role. Legislature provided this by saying that we think retrospective appeal, we understand there will be problems with it, but this serves the public interest more, that if these judgments are revisited. This Panama judgment is one. This judgment, other time disqualification in Samyutta Baloch is another judgment. Then we have the dam judgment. And there's a long list of judgments. Article 63 is interpretation. That is complete rewriting of the Constitution. So there are so many judgments that needs to be revisited, and Supreme Court appears to have closed those doors, which is provided by the Parliament. And I think an alternative route would be, and I hope in the detailed reasons, they would read out the retrospective and make a room for at least selective revisiting of some of the judgments that have completely rewritten the Constitution, which was Article 63. So as another point, what Hafiz was saying, that the Nawaz Shareef appealed these and Nawaz Shareef was not disqualified for life in his own decision. He was disqualified in another decision, which I earlier referred to, Justice Baryar Saab, Samyullah Baloch, judgment. So they were, if the Supreme Court had not closed the door for retrospective appeal, there would have been indirect ways of revisiting the disqualification due to Supreme Court's reinterpretation of Article 63A.
Fair enough. Let me take Hafiz Saab's opinion on this. Hafiz Saab, I hope you heard all of what Usama is saying. Do you think that perhaps there can be that collective wisdom or collective way of looking at those cases where there has been
there is another way.
Okay.
I mean, we are coming to narrow down the situation. The first, the narrow down situation is that the former Prime Minister has to acquit from the Islamabad High Court.
Yes.
So this is the first barrier. We are talking about the second area for filing a paper. Until and unless his conviction is not set aside by the High Court, he cannot submit his papers to the returning officer. So for suppose he has succeeded and his conviction in both cases was set aside by the Islamabad High Court, so he can file a paper on the one ground, because there is another amendment in the Election Act, and which is called as the Section 232, and which has specifically given the retrospective effect from 2010. It says that where there is no prescribed disqualification period in any law or the Constitution, the period would be for the 5 years. So the amendment is there in Section 232 of the Election Act. Suppose he files a paper and other side made his objection that he is permanently disqualified because of the judgment of the Supreme Court of Pakistan, and for the sake of argument his nominations paper were rejected by the returning officer. The other side has a right to challenge before the High Court as the election tribunal. So in that particular situation, the situation would be that whether the application of the Section 232 is applicable or not, particularly with reference to the prescribed disqualification period or the judgment of the Supreme Court of Pakistan. And ultimately the matter will go to the Supreme Court of Pakistan, and the Supreme Court will say on that when both judgments were passed by the Supreme Court of Pakistan, there was no period prescribed in the Constitution. And that's why at that time it was said that if there is a declaration permanently against a person, he is permanently disqualified. But after that there has been an amendment by the Parliament, and in Section 232, which has a retrospective effect. So meaning thereby, if there is a 5 years gap over there and he has completed the 5 years period, so the Supreme Court can allow to the former Prime Minister for allowing his nominations paper. So ultimately in both situations the matter will go to the Supreme Court of Pakistan, and in that particular situation the interpretation of the newly amendment made by the PDM government in the Election Act 2017 would be a big legal controversy and would resolve the present issue by not taking into the previous judgment of the Supreme Court of Pakistan. So this is the way.
Right, fair enough.
Yeah.
Saif, as far as the political scenario at this time is concerned, we are looking at Mia Saab's return, in the sense that of course he's already embarked on the journey which is going to break in 2 or 3 places. There's also at this time the PMLN gearing up, and their workers, and Maryam Nawaz leading Shareef Saab also, all of that. As far as the PMLN position, as far as party positions are concerned, at this time when we look at the overall scenario, it still seems a rather divided palette. Isn't that true?
I think that it is particularly true to an extent that even during the meetings in London, we did see that many of the people who were seen to be as senior party members were not really seen there. And maybe the discourse of action that PMLN recently took, it is something that has divided the political fraternity of the party. And now what was that legal or maybe that political discourse that PMLN Supremo took? That was that maybe once again there was a little bit of indication that they would not surrender back on the verdict that they had decided for themselves back in 2017, and that was...
You're saying the narrative
which was decided as a party verdict back then, that if this party stands for anything, it stands for maybe what stance regarding to the establishment Mia Nawaz Sharif had taken at that time.
From which there seems to have been a step back since then.
It was a certain step back, and maybe after the PDM government came in power, there was a considerable step back, because there was another alternate leadership in force and in action. Now, the issue at hand is that there is one political spectrum in the PMLN that believes that maybe in order to contest the next elections, the party needs to build up a new narrative. And then there's another hardlined spectrum of political fraternity in the party that still believes that continuity of that narrative would be giving them the political momentum. So I think it's a trade-off. It's a cost-benefit analysis.
Between popularity
between
and
popularity,
what they see as political wisdom.
Absolutely. So it's a cost-benefit analysis, and that cost-benefit analysis certainly would have to be weighed with recently what has happened in the Supreme Court as well. So one of the biggest costs, or momentarily a setback for PMLN, has been what commentary has been made in the courts of law, ultimately as to what the future of the PMLN Supremo is.
Fair enough. This is all the time that we have for this segment. Thank you so much for being with us. Saif, Jamshed, Baryar Sahab, thank you for joining us. Hafiz Ahsaan Ahmad, khokhar, thank you for being with us today. Usama, khawar, Ghumman, thank you for your very valuable opinion. We'll take a short break and then we'll be right back. Ji, Qamar Sahab, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Ji, like I was saying, you know, what is the situation at this time in your opinion? There doesn't seem to be a much chance now of there being this de-escalation from this point onwards.
Well, what it seems right now is that the people of Palestine and Gaza, they're going to get the collective punishment for this action which has taken by Hamas. I'm sure a majority of the Palestinians might not have expected this kind of a reaction. And I think at this moment, the international community doesn't seem much concerned how to de-escalate. The United Nations has been just issuing warnings. The Muslim world is just trying to sit together, although it has been about a week, and they have failed even to talk and to engage with each other. I think the Western world is going to get so much concessions for Israel this time, because if the Israelis believe that they have to go for a ground invasion of Gaza, definitely it's going to have a far-reaching impact for the entire region. The most important thing is that be it the Palestinians or the sympathizers, there is a likely possibility that this massive use of force by Israel may lead to some of the people in the Muslim world, those can go for extremist activities, which could be further counterproductive. But at the same time, I think the Muslim world and the Palestinians themselves need to look at how they need to respond to this oppression of Israelis. Whether the armed oppression is going to be beneficial, particularly in these times when we have social media, when the Hamas or the other groups they cannot get any kind of a support from the Muslim world. Nobody is going to give them ammunition. Nobody is going to give them anything. Nobody is going to be part of this war. So how this conflict needs to be resketched in the minds of all the thinkers and the strategists, those who are inside the region, that is going to be established in coming weeks.
You yourself have spoken about the ineffectiveness, one has to contend, of the UN. You know, the resolutions that have been flouted overall, you know, the killing of civilians, all that we are looking at this time. This is not, of course, we are looking, this is happening also in Kashmir, this is happening, and the world continues to look another way. We've also talked about this on a number of occasions. But this kind of, you know, what's happening at this time, this kind of blatant, blatant brutality that is coming from the other side towards civilians, towards women and children, there doesn't seem to be any solution at this time. Do you think it's going to increase? Do you think that this kind of violence is going to increase? There can't be a peaceful solution. It's going to get, or do you think perhaps this may be a time for the world to realize that the potential ramifications of this conflict, if it is not resolved?
Well, I think the world definitely needs to look at it, and I think the Muslim world and the Palestinians they also need to look at it that how they have to move on with this conflict and how they have to move on with Israelis. Um, that is one thing. The second thing which I find is that nobody will stop Israel. Nobody can do this. But the question is, can we save Palestinians? Can we save the people of Gaza? That is the most important thing. And as I mentioned earlier, we also need to look at this very carefully, that the action which Hamas has taken, how far they are going to get support for this kind of act, and how far they are going to make their act as a legitimate action. This is a very important, because when it comes to international law, when it comes to all the Western powers, they have just labeled the organization as a militant, extremist, terrorist, and nobody is there to rescue and save them. So I think there needs to be a soul searching within the Muslim world, that how to engage even those countries which are having such conflicts. And as you mentioned of Kashmir, I believe we have seen much of violence in the world, or much of mistrust in the Muslim world, and much of the mistrust between Muslim world and the West is because of these unfinished issues. Either it is Kashmir or Palestine, and these needs to be resolved definitely. But I think the United Nations, that is just a toothless tiger. They don't have any kind of an appetite. They can't do anything. But a soul searching within the Muslim world needs to be, because Muslim world is deeply divided on this, what the Hamas has done.
Perhaps soul searching within the Muslim world, yes. But what about a rethink as as far as the powers, the superpowers, so to speak? The kind of rethink that is needed for there to be peace. I mean, this has potential ramifications for everyone, for the world, whether, they are choosing to take sides in a manner which is clearly partisan, which is clearly inhumane. Shouldn't better sense prevail for long-term consequences?
Well, obviously, we have been raising such kind of a voice for long that the better sense needs to prevail. But many in the West, they are saying that we didn't provoke for this kind of an act. But at the same time, obviously, the way the people of Palestine, they have been pressed, marginalized, and they are living in ghettos. That's known as an open-air jail, one of the biggest jail in the world. So I think at the end of the day, these questions needs to be addressed by the Muslims. We have to find out the solution. We need to sit together. And large population of the Muslim world, they are trying to resolve their issues with Israel on their own, and they are not taking, or they are not considering the opinion of other Muslim countries. I think that is a frustration among in some areas which are conflict prone, and that is where I think the Hamas has come out of all of a sudden, and they believe that this larger Arab-Israel normalization is not good for the Palestine. So the hawks within the Muslim world, they are trying to take advantage of all that Arab-Israel normalization, and they believe that it needs to be stopped. So in my understanding, if you just look at the protest around the world, this was a Friday. Now the Muslims have to wait for Friday to protest against Israel. So that shows that the level of appreciation or the level of understanding among many countries in the world is not which used to be 20 years ago or 10 years ago. Things have changed a lot, and I think the Arab world, the OIC, they need to take an initiative, and they need to address such kind of issues, so that the larger Muslim population, which is more than a billion people, they should come to know that we have to move on, or we have to move forward. Otherwise, if the leadership decides something else and the public is not grasping what the leadership is deciding, then it is going to create further crisis within the Muslim community.
Fair enough. Thank you so much, Dr. Qamar Cheema Sahab. Thank you for your opinion. Overall, of course, we are looking at the world watching while thousands are butchered, where women and children, the access to water, electricity having been cut off. There is the kind of outcry that is building up is perhaps something that the world powers need to consider. When we look at the brutality, when we look at the inhumane treatment of innocents we need to perhaps realize that this is a time for a solution, whether we look to the Muslim world or whether the responsibility also rests with the powers and the countries that count, even when they are taking a stand that may not be necessarily accurate or may not be on the right side. Perhaps it is a time to reflect on what the long-term consequences of this conflict are now coming to. Thank you so much for joining us today on Perspective.